Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This one we are recapping week 12 of the NFL season on DraftKings. What went right, what went wrong. Then we're going to take a look at the main lineup I ended up using for my cash games and single entry GPPs. Then we'll take a look ahead at week 13 of the NFL season, go over some of my first initial reactions of the slate, looking at pricing, looking at matchups. Then we'll try to build a lineup together just based off of first initial reactions. Anyway, before we continue, you guys could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. Getting close to 3K subs. Hopefully we can get there soon. I do appreciate all the support on this channel. You guys rock. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, don't have a lot of Twitter followers. You can follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. And also have Instagram, but I don't know if you really want to follow me on Instagram. It's more of a personal account. But you can if you want to. It's there. So, yeah, I think that's about it. Spreadsheets are available in the link in the description below that I build every single week. And I say we get right into the recap. So also I will have a special Thanksgiving video because we have the 3-game slate on Thanksgiving. So I will be putting that out probably tomorrow or Wednesday, early in the morning on Wednesday. But more than likely on Tuesday night. So without further ado, let's get into the recap. So it was a good week for me. I cashed in my cash games. Single entries, I just missed that example lineup I built on Saturday morning. I'm pretty sure they got like 140 something, so that ended up going well despite having Carson Wentz in that lineup, which I'll talk about him in a little bit. But my number one quarterback, and so was everyone else's number one quarterback, it was Matt Ryan. He ended up getting 9 fantasy points, ended up not even finishing this game. Matt Schaub did, and Matt Schaub actually came in and threw a touchdown to Calvin Ridley. So yeah, Matt Ryan, he was a clunker versus Tampa Bay. I mean, it made all the sense in the world. Tampa Bay is one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. They are the second worst team in the league versus quarterbacks. And he had 271 yards, not too bad, but no touchdowns and 1 interception. Completed 50% of his passes. It was rough out there if you played Matt Ryan. I believe in the $100 double up, I believe he was around 52%. So I actually didn't play Matt Ryan in that lineup, so I'm glad he sucked, but obviously I had him as a number one quarterback, so I'm not glad that he sucked in that aspect. But Matt Ryan, he was a big disappointment. Baker Goatfield had him at number 2. I originally had him a little bit lower, but once Carson Wentz, I saw that the weather was getting a little iffy there. Then he lost Alshon Jeffrey. I just took him off my cash game rankings altogether. So that was one of the big updates for me. He outplayed Matt Ryan, though, so I guess you can't be too mad if you played Carson Wentz because he was much cheaper than Matt Ryan, ended up outscoring him. But yeah, Baker Mayfield, I had him at number 2. He had a fantastic game. He had 3 touchdowns at the 10-minute mark of the second quarter. So it was looking like he could have had a big day. Kind of really didn't do anything else after that in the touchdown department, but had a very good fantasy day. 27 fantasy points, 24 for 34, 327 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He threw it behind Odell slightly, so it turned it into a pick. He had his hands on it, but definitely that was definitely on Baker. But yeah, he had a pretty good day, and if you played him, you were very happy. Browns just, had a very easy win versus Miami. Got a little closer at the end, but they took care of business. Jeff Driscoll, he ended up with 15 fantasy points. Not the best, but again, if you played any of these other guys, they outscored Matt Ryan, and you were definitely happy with that because they came at a cheaper price point. He ended up with 15 fantasy points, like I said, 20 for 33, 207 yards, 1 touchdown. The 3 picks weren't great, but still 9 for 63 on the ground, and that's why I said I like Jeff Driscoll because he's going to offer us rushing upside, which gives us a decent floor, and that pretty much saved his day because you got 6.3 fantasy points out of that. And if he doesn't do anything in the rushing department, you're looking at a very sucky day. You're talking like 9 fantasy points. So Jeff Driscoll, he was fine considering all things with Matt Ryan sucking. Then Jameis Winston, he was my number 4 for cash games, and he rocked. He had 29 fantasy points, over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, 8 rushes for 38 yards. And like I said, if you play Jameis Winston, don't watch the games because it's gross. I mean, if you watch he just makes dumb plays. He turns the ball over, and, it's disgusting. So, yeah, Jameis Winston, he was great for GPPs. He was great for cash games. It was not that high owned in cash, but definitely like Jameis Winston. I definitely like Jameis Winston. He did very well. For the running back position, I had Alvin Kamara as my number 1, and he was looking like garbage for the main portion of this game. But almost half his points came on that final drive. I believe he caught like 4 passes that drive, had a couple of nice runs. So I think he was like at 9 fantasy points beforehand, and then he got all the way up to 19.2, which pretty much saved his day. Obviously, we were hoping for a much better game out of someone that was 8,100 or 8,200. But, he still did fine. 19 fantasy points. He was 71% owned in cash games, so it really didn't matter what he did too much. GPPs, he was around 35%, so that's kind of where it hurt a little bit. 19 points could have been worse, saved his day at the end of that game. I was kind of hoping it went into overtime so we could get some more Kamara work, but it just didn't happen. Derrick Henry, I moved up on him a lot throughout the week. Originally, I had him, he's like a lower tier running back for me because I did prefer guys like Le'Veon Bell and some other guys, but I ended up just getting higher on him on the week because the more I looked at it, Jacksonville's rushing defense it's just so bad. They got dismantled by Jonathan Williams the week beforehand and Marlon Mack. And he came out and he did his thing. It was a little rough in the early going. He had a receiving touchdown called back. That was for about 30 yards. But in the second half, he had that, 70-some yard touchdown he broke off. And then the very next drive, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they fumbled the kickoff return, I believe. And then Derrick Henry got the ball right back on the 10-yard line, ran right in for another touchdown. So you had a lot of fantasy points happen in a very short amount of time. But late in the season, they just ride Derrick Henry out. The guy smashes versus Jacksonville, had over 100 yards, 159 rushing yards, did have a fumble, but 2 rushing touchdowns and 1 reception, and he had a fantastic game. So it's probably pretty hard to cash if you didn't have Derrick Henry. I had him as my number 2 this week. As for Le'Veon Bell, he had a fine game. I believe he ended up in the 15.8 fantasy points. Not the worst for someone that was 6,400. 12 rushing attempts for 49 yards, had 5 targets, 5 catches for 59 yards. The Jets destroyed Oakland. So Le'Veon Bell, you weren't too happy with it, but he also didn't crush you. Miles Sanders with Jordan Howard out, I definitely had interest in him. J.J. was a little bit concerning, but still Miles Sanders was the main running back here. Ended up scoring 11 fantasy points at 5,000. Not the worst play in the world. 12 rushing attempts, 63 yards, 5 targets, 3 catches, 23 yards. Not too bad. It could have been worse, but actually could have been better because Carson Wentz missed him on not a wheel route, but he kind of paused for a second, and then he kind of snuck out of the backfield towards the end zone. They were inside the 10-yard line. Carson Wentz sailed it right over his head. I'm sure you guys saw it on Twitter. One of the worst throws I've seen. But yeah, and I think he could have got a touchdown on that play as well. But Miles Sanders was fine for his price tag. Nick Chubb, I loved Nick Chubb this week, and he balled out. Just a really good matchup versus Miami. Had 21 carries. He's had over 20 carries in the past 7 games in a row, I think. So Kareem Hunt hasn't really not bothered him, and Kareem Hunt had a fine game as well. He had over 100 yards on the ground, 1 touchdown, 4 targets, 3 catches for 58 yards. Nick Chubb just continues to run over defenses. And Philip Lindsay, he was very high owned. I think he was 35 to 40% owned in cash, which was a little surprising. I thought he was a decent play, but I didn't think he should have been 35, 40% owned. But he ended up scoring 11. I remember exactly 7 fantasy points. It was actually, you got the snowflake on DraftKings, so it was definitely not a good day for Philip Lindsay. 13 carries for 57 yards, 1 catch for 11 yards. Did have 3 targets, but Denver they couldn't really do anything on offense versus Buffalo. So Philip Lindsay was disappointing. As for the wide receivers, I had Julio Jones as my number 1, and I believe, 60.6% owned. He did get hurt at one point in this game, but he did come back in, so you really can't use that as an excuse. Calvin Ridley ended up having the better day, which I did think was a pretty good pivot off of Julio this week. Unfortunately, I didn't listen to myself, and I just went up to Julio, but I really thought Julio would have a smash game. But 11 fantasy points, you are looking for more out of someone that was 8,000. Odell, he had a pretty solid day. It wasn't an outstanding day, but he had 20 fantasy points, which is the most he's had in a good while. Had 8 targets, 84 yards, 6 catches, had that nice 35-yard touchdown that Baker threw on the post route. Ended up with 20 fantasy points. And then Calvin Ridley, I already talked about him, about Julio Jones. I actually had my first 4 cash game ranking guys. So I had the 2 big dogs, Julio Jones and Odell. Then I just had their wide receiver 2s, Calvin Ridley and Jarvis Landry, because I love both of their spots. So you could either spend all the way up for those guys, or you could spend down for their 1Bs to their 1As. And yeah, Calvin Ridley, he had 22 fantasy points, kind of saved his day at the end of the game, but had 14 targets. 14 targets. That's if you're going to tell me Calvin Ridley was going to get 14 targets versus Tampa Bay, he probably would have been close to my wide receiver 1 in the week. Had 6 catches, 85 yards, and the touchdown. Not too bad for Calvin Ridley. But Jarvis Landry, that was kind of the slate breaker. I guess Chris Godwin was up there too, as well as DJ Moore. But Jarvis Landry, he crushed. Had 13 targets, 10 catches, 148 yards, and 2 touchdowns versus his former team. The guy's been doing very well recently. I believe he's had a receiving touchdown in the past 4 weeks, I think. But yeah, Jarvis Landry had a fantastic game at 6,300. DeVante Parker, he was struggling for a little bit, but he ended up pulling through. I really like the Brown stack, and I'm bringing it back with DeVante Parker or Mike Gesicki this week, and that ended up probably being one of the top stacks on this slate. I didn't actually see who won the Millie Maker or anything, but I have to assume Jarvis Landry might have been in the lineup. I think. And Baker Mayfield, not sure though, but definitely was a likely combination. Or Jameis Winston and Chris Godwin definitely could have been up there as well, or a mixture of the two. But DeVante Parker, he ended up with 15 fantasy points, not too bad. 11 targets, I did like the volume there. 6 catches, 91 yards, just missed that 100-yard bonus. So DeVante Parker definitely was fine. He did outscore Julio Jones. N'Keal Harry, he caught 1 catch, but it was one important catch because he caught it for a touchdown. He was my punt play of the week. Ended up having 4 targets, 1 catch, 10 yards, touchdown, 8 fantasy points. I will take it at that price point. Then I had Russell Gage. I liked him quite a bit. Just some more Atlanta pass catchers versus Tampa Bay. He ended up with 15.6 fantasy points, so he definitely crushed value at his $3,900 price tag. Had 10 targets, 8 catches, 76 yards. If I knew beforehand that Russell Gage was going to get 10 targets, he would definitely been locked into my lineups, but obviously I don't know what's going to happen like that during the game. But Russell Gage was definitely a nice pump play. As for the tight end position, Zach Ertz was my tight end 1, especially with Alshon Jeffrey out. There was just a lot of targets. I thought the 2 tight ends for the Philadelphia Eagles are both fantastic plays, and Ertz was the highest scoring tight end on the slate. 27 fantasy points, 14 targets, 12 catches, 91 yards, and a touchdown near the end of the game. So Zach Ertz definitely balled out. Originally had Dallas Goedert as my number 2. I chickened out and put Vance McDonald. Wish I didn't, but he ended up sucking. What do you have? 1 fantasy point, 1.10. Had 1 target, caught it for 1 yard. I almost wish he just would have got 0. I mean, that was awful. Dallas Goedert, though, he had a pretty good game. He was pretty high owned, did have that fumble, but he still had 9 fantasy points for his price tag, which was not too bad. Had 8 targets, 7 catches, only 32 yards, but still not bad for his price point. Mike Gesicki had a really nice game for his price tag, I should say. Had 11 fantasy points, 7 targets, which was great, 3 catches, 28 yards, and 1 touchdown. Then Noah Fant, that offense was just abysmal. He ended up with 4 fantasy points, so nothing too special there. 5 targets, only 14 yards. Then Ryan Griffin, he found the end zone. I believe he finished with 10 fantasy points, so not too bad. 3 targets, 3 catches, 13 yards, and a touchdown. The Jets ran away with that game. And as for the defenses, who cares? Broncos, Bengals, Steelers, Saints, Bears, Browns. A few of those did good, a few of them didn't. So, and as for my main lineup, I ended up going with Baker Mayfield. I'm a big Browns fan, so I said, if Baker's going to be high owned, I don't want to root against the guy, so I just went with the homer route. Ended up working out. 27 fantasy points, 16% owned, which I thought was a little lower owned than I thought he was going to be, so I was a little bit happy with that. And I was scared of that Matt Ryan ownership, but it eventually didn't actually end up hurting me, which was pretty nice. But then I had Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara as my 2 stud running backs. Then I had Odell, Harry, and Julio Jones as my 3 wide receivers. Then Vance McDonald with a 1.1 fantasy point outing. Rough, was 35% owned though. Then Miles Sanders was 37%, 11.6 points. And then the Bengals defense, the punt defense, going up against Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, because Rudolph ended up getting benched. And then Hodges comes in and throws a 79-yard touchdown, because of course. But still, they had 6 fantasy points, and they were dirt cheap. So definitely like the value you got out of them. And I cashed in my cash games very easily, and I just missed single entry GVPs. I was like, it's close. Just needed like something else from Derrick Henry or N'Keal Harry. Fortunately, did not happen, but it was still a pretty good week for me. Hope you guys had a good week as well. And without further ado, I say we get into the Draftkings first look lineup portion of this video. And let me just zoom this out a little bit. Nope. Too much. I think that's good. Let me make sure the players' names pop up when I hit them. All right, perfect. Okay. So, we have an interesting slate on here. There's a lot of guys that I think are priced pretty nicely, and there's some guys that are a little bit expensive here. Like Patrick Mahomes, I think he's a fantastic option, but I don't see myself paying $7,400 for a quarterback this week. It's definitely doable if you don't play Christian McCaffrey, although that's a little bit scary, but we'll talk about that. But my quarterbacks I'm looking at right now, I do like Jared Goff going up against Arizona, the worst defense in the league versus quarterbacks right now. Carson Wentz, he's dealing with a bruised throwing hand, or I think it's a throwing hand, but he should be good to go versus Miami. Everyone has good games versus Miami, so I could see him being in play. Now you got to watch and see what his receivers are doing, or who's in, who's out, but I would think Carson Wentz is on a short list for me as of right now. Ryan Tannehill was the highest scoring quarterback of the week last week versus Jacksonville. Don't really see a repeat of that happening though, but he has been solid. But I do like Nick Foles here at 5,700. So this game has one of the highest over-unders on the slate. It's sitting at 49 right now. We only have a 1.5 point spread in favor of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the thing here is, so the Jaguars have a pretty high implied team total, but this is a very good run defense from Tampa Bay. You should tend to run pass the ball on Tampa Bay. So I could see Fournette having a little bit of a struggle here running the ball. So I'm thinking here Vegas thinks Nick Foles should have a pretty good day here if they're going to have a 49 point over-under and a close spread. I think this is going to be a Nick Foles game. It could be his first breakout game for Jacksonville, and I like his receivers. And I like the price point at 5,700. He doesn't break the bank here. 18 points versus Indy, 14 points versus Tennessee. Obviously not great, but he has thrown the ball 47 and 48 times in these two matchups, and they have been losing the past two games, so that's kind of led to that. But I think points are going to be scored in this game. He's going to be at home, and I think Nick Foles, 5,700. I think he can get you 250 plus yards, 2 touchdowns, maybe 3 if we're lucky. I think Leonard Fournette's going to struggle to run the ball on this defense. So I think Nick Foles is a pretty nice play at 5,700 as of right now. And then at the wide receiver position, we have a tough decision this week. Do we want to pay $10,500 for Christian McCaffrey? Well, I do want to. It's just as of right now, I have not ran my projections, and I don't know. I mean, it's kind of hard to gauge who's going to be the greatest values without me doing so. So it's only Monday. So as of right now, he's not going to be my first look lineup, but just know throughout the week, I'm going to try my best to be able to fit him in my lineup because he is the number one play every single week. I don't care who he's playing. Tough matchup or good matchup, he bowls out. Last week, it was a terrible matchup versus New Orleans. Only had 64 yards on the ground, but he had 9 targets, 9 catches for 69 yards, ended up with 2 touchdowns. The guy is a beast. I don't care who he plays. And it's a good matchup versus Washington. So as of right now, he's not in my lineup, first look lineup, but just know I'm trying my best to fit him in once I can figure out the better value plays on the slate, because as of right now, it's kind of hard to do so just on an early on and on Monday. So just know Christian McCaffrey, I'm going to do my best to fit him in, but just for this lineup build, we're not going to do it as of right now, just to make my life a little bit easier here. So we're going to drop down to Saquon Barkley at 7,400, who seems a bit cheap here. So Saquon Barkley at 7,400. I do think he's a pretty good play going up against Green Bay. They're giving the third most points per game to running backs at 29.5 points per game. Now, the last 2 weeks have been rough for Saquon Barkley. Still scored 8 points in each outing, but versus the Jets, he had 1 yard on 13 carries. Obviously, that's rough. Saved his day in the passing game a little bit. And then last week versus Chicago, also pretty rough. But, before that, in some good matchups, not a great matchup versus Dallas, but he still had 15 fantasy points, then 28, 17. 7's not great, but then 25, 20. I think he's going to be fine here. Running backs tend to have good games versus Green Bay. We saw Tevin Coleman get a touchdown last night. Then we saw Raheem Mostert have a pretty good game. So I think Saquon Barkley is going to be fine here. He's going to be involved in the passing game, so we have the safe floor there as well, even if they do fall behind. It's not like he's just, if they fall behind, it's not like Saquon Barkley gets kicked to the curb. He will still be in the game. So 7,400. I do think he's a pretty decent value, and I think he's probably going to grade out as a better point per dollar option than Christian McCaffrey. But Christian McCaffrey has not really had a dud game besides Tampa Bay. Saquon Barkley has had some dud games, but 7,400, the price tag is nice, and it's a good matchup at home. So I will take a shot there as of right now. And as for my RB2, I'm liking Le'Veon Bell here at 7,200. Now I know he's not been great, and the efficiency definitely isn't there, but he's had 4 pretty good games in a row. So versus Miami, 20 points. New York, 16 points. Washington, 17. Oakland, 15. All pretty good matchups, and he gets another good matchup here going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. They are giving up 28.5 points per game here to running backs, which is bottom 6 most points per game allowed to running backs. So Le'Veon Bell, I think he should be fine here. The Bengals defense does not offer much resistance whatsoever. If they fall behind, he's still going to be part of the game plan. If they get ahead, he's still going to be a part of the game plan. He's going to get you over 20 touches. Le'Veon Bell versus Cincinnati, I do think he makes some sense this week at 7,200. Do I wish he was a little bit cheaper? Yes, but as of right now, this is just a first look lineup, and I'm looking for guys that are in good matchups, get volume, and have some talent. So as of right now, I like these 2 running backs. Now for the wide receiver spot, there's one guy I like a lot this week, and it's going to be Davante Adams coming in at 7K. I have yet to play the guy this season, but he's still a little cheap here for a guy like Davante Adams, and I like what he's been doing recently. So versus Philly, I guess that's not recent, but just in this game log, he had 31 points versus Philly. And then when he came back 3 weeks ago versus the Los Angeles Chargers, he had 11 fantasy points, not great, but he still had 11 targets. And then versus Carolina, he had 10 targets, 21 points. Then last week versus San Francisco, which is one of the toughest matchups in the league right now, he had 12 targets, 7 catches, 19 fantasy points. Not too bad. But now he gets to go up against the New York Giants, who are absolutely awful versus the pass this season. They're allowing 43.3 points per game to wide receivers, which is second most in the NFL. And the Packers have a decently high implied team total here. They have a 46.5 point over-under in Vegas, and they are 7.5 point favorites. And they're playing on the road here. So I do like the correlation of Davante Adams and Saquon Barkley. You're running it back. I think the Packers should be able to put up a lot of points here. And then Saquon Barkley, I think if anyone does anything on the Giants, it's going to be Saquon Barkley. So I like the idea of running those two back together. So Davante Adams, he's looking like a pretty good play for me this week. He's very safe. He's been getting double-digit targets every single week since week 4 that he's actually played. So that's just, 1, 2, 3, 4 games. But he's still had double-digit targets. He's a wide receiver 1 on this offense. So definitely like Davante Adams here. I think he's a fantastic play. So we will plug him in. And as for the wide receiver 2 spot, I scroll down a little bit, but I do think DeDe Westbrook is a pretty good play at only 5,000. He seems a little bit cheap here. And I want to pair one of my wide receivers with my quarterback. And DJ Chark's pretty expensive, and I think he's 6,600. So why not step down a little bit to DeDe Westbrook in 2 games with Nick Foles this season? The past 2 weeks, he had 6 targets. Not great, but he still had 7 fantasy points. And then last week versus Tennessee, he had 9 targets, 8 catches for 14 points. Points are going to be scored in this game. It's a close spread. I think the Jaguars might struggle to run the ball here, so they're going to be throwing the ball quite a bit. Do I think DJ Chark has a pretty good game? Yes, I do, but I think DeDe Westbrook can as well. Tampa Bay has not guarded the slot great whatsoever, or really just at any position so far this season. They're giving up the most points per game to wide receivers at 49.7 points per game. So DJ Chark, DeDe Westbrook, I think they can both have good games, but Westbrook is significantly cheaper, and he's just a much cheaper option to pair with Nick Foles. So we're going to plug him in our lineup as of right now. So I like to start to this lineup. We got Nick Foles, great matchup versus Tampa Bay. Saquon Barkley, great matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. Le'Veon Bell, pretty good matchup versus Cincinnati. Davante Adams, great matchup versus the Giants. And then DeDe Westbrook, great matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we get our quarterback wide receiver pairing. So at this point, let's go to the flex spot and fit in our third running back, because that's what I usually like to put in my flex spot. And I wasn't seeing a lot. I usually like to go with a cheaper running back at this point. And then I almost glossed over him. But Jonathan Williams coming in at 5,300. Marlon Mack is going to be out. In the past 2 weeks, he's been pretty good. He only played half the game versus Jacksonville because Marlon Mack got hurt half the game, but he still had 13 carries, 116 yards, and 18.7 fantasy points. And then last week, we thought it was going to be more of a split with Jordan Wilkins. It certainly was not. He had 26 carries, 104 yards, 3 targets, 17 yards, and 24 fantasy points. That's not bad at all. Like, I will take that for someone that's 5,300. He's looked pretty solid. And the Titans are bottom half in the league when it comes to running backs for points given up per game at 25.9 points per game. Hines might be involved a little bit, especially in the passing game. But Jonathan Williams, he's coming in cheap, and he seems like he's going to be a bell cow running back for the time being until Marlon Mack ever returns to the field. So, and I mean, if Marlon Mack happened to come back this week, obviously you can't play Jonathan Williams, but just assuming he's out, 5,300, I'll take it as a workhorse back. So don't mind that at all. So we have 3 running backs that are going to get high volume at this point and pretty decent matchups here. And now for the defense, we have 4,100 left. Well, I guess at this point we can probably go with our wide receiver 3 spot, because the tight end and defense is usually something I like to fill out last. So I can tell we're not going to be able to afford too much at the wide receiver 3 spot, but I do think Tyler Boyd, you can run it back with Le'Veon Bell. I do think the Jets get a lead in this game, and then the Bengals are going to be throwing the ball quite a bit. Although I will say they got Andy Dalton back, so I don't know if it's going to help the offense at all, but I do think it's going to help Tyler Boyd here, because Tyler Boyd was great with Andy Dalton earlier in the season. 14, 25, 12, 6, 31. Ryan Finley came in, got a little bit rough, but last week with Ryan Finley, he still had 9 targets, 5 catches, 101 yards, good matchup versus Pittsburgh. But now he gets Andy Dalton back. I do trust Andy Dalton to get the ball to Tyler Boyd better than I do Ryan Finley, so that's definitely an upgrade for him. 5,500 seems a little cheap here for the matchup versus the Jets. And they were factoring that price in with Ryan Finley, so I do think he'd probably be around this price range, or at least maybe a little bit more if he had Andy Dalton at quarterback. And it's a good matchup versus the Jets. They've struggled versus slot receivers this season, and I think they're going to be trailing. They're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit. The Jets have had a pretty good run defense this season, not so much in the passing game. They are giving up 39.7 points per game to wide receivers, which is bottom 10 in the league. So Tyler Boyd, don't mind him at 5,500. Should have close to double-digit targets, if not more. Gets Andy Dalton back, so Don't mind going with Tyler Boyd there. I do think he's a pretty nice wide receiver 3 option. Although I guess technically he's the wide receiver 2 because he's 5,500 and DeDe Westbrook is 5K, but same thing. So now at this point we have 34.50 left. So at this point I'm probably going to look at a defense and just see what tight end fits. So the first thing I always do is scroll to the bottom of the defenses and see who's there and see if they are viable. Last week it was the Bengals that were viable. But this week we had the Raiders going against the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. I don't think I can do that. I don't think I can play the Giants versus the Packers. I don't think I can play the Dolphins ever. And the Cardinals versus the Rams. I mean, Jared Goff is prone to mistakes, but I'm not really sure if I want to play the Cardinals. The Redskins versus Carolina. If I end up playing McCaffrey, I wouldn't want to play the Redskins defense. But the Browns defense, I know I'm a Browns fan, so I'm not being a homer though, but Pittsburgh offense is not great right now. Not great at all. They benched Mason Rudolph last week and got Duck Hodges in there. And I know the Browns are missing some defensive pieces right now, but Ogunjobi will be back from suspension. Hopefully Olivier Vernon will be back because he was questionable to play last week. Unfortunately didn't. But I do think he's going to be back this week. Obviously, the loss of Myles Garrett is going to hurt this defense from creating pressure. But Vernon and Ogunjobi and Sheldon Richardson is not a bad defensive line. They also have Chad Thomas on the end as well. So the Browns defense, it's going one of the lowest totals on the slate. It's only a 40-point total, which is second lowest, only behind the Jets and Cincinnati game. So I don't mind plugging them in at 2,600. They've been pretty good recently, so don't mind that. I really don't respect any of the Steelers quarterbacks they throw in, if it's Hodges or Mason Rudolph. Now, at this point, we have 4,300 left remaining. Now, you can go with two options here. You can play Ryan Griffin going against Cincinnati. Ryan Griffin has been very good recently. He scored 10 points, 24 points, did nothing versus the Giants, but then he had 11 versus Miami, then 24 versus Jacksonville. So I wouldn't hate Ryan Griffin going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Do I love having three guys in this Jets and Cincinnati game? No, not really. So if you want to diversify yourself a little bit, you could drop down to Dallas Goedert, who is going up against Miami. And he's had a pretty good recent stretch of games. He has been very solid since week 6. He had 9.8, 15.9, 11.2, 7.9, 12.6, and 9.2. I think he's a fine option here. He's seen consistent targets, had 8 targets last week. We will have to see how the health of the wide receivers are for Philly here. But he's still going to be involved. Him and Zach Ertz are the main pieces on this offense as of right now. So at 4,100, we could plug him in, and I think he's a pretty solid option. If he gets into the end zone, you're definitely going to be pretty happy. So as of right now, this is just your first look lineup. I got Nick Foles, Saquon Barkley, Le'Veon Bell, Davante Adams, DeDe Westbrook, Tyler Boyd, Dallas Goedert, Jonathan Williams, and the Browns defense. And I will leave you guys with that. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, remember to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. Remember, take this lineup as a grain of salt. It's just me going through my first initial reactions on this slate. Obviously, things change a ton by the time Saturday rolls around. I'll see you guys in the next video, and have a great Monday.